So in this video, we'll be talking about India, and chapter 22 is really a look at and a comparison of China and India, and so particularly into the 20th century. So we're starting with the independence struggle, which took place 1914 to 1947. Who were they gaining independence from? Great Britain. That is who dominated their government. And just to make a comparison to China here, like China, the independence movement in India started with the intellectuals. It was designed by the intellectuals, but it expanded to the peasantry and pretty much depended on peasant support. Just like Mao in communist China depended on peasant support, so he reached out to the peasantry. During World War I, the British had actually told the Indians that they were preparing them for democracy and self-rule. But the British rule became unacceptable to Indians when the government censored the press, or they controlled what was being said by magazines, newspapers, commercials, that type of thing. And then they fired on a peaceful crowd of protesters, killing 379 people. So at that point, the Indians decided that they were ready to overthrow or oust British rule in India. So we're looking at British policies and practices. There'll be some writing here. Most of the leaders in India were British educated Indian Hindus. So they were Indian, like in ethnicity, but they had been trained in British ways, British institutions, but were also practicing Hindus. There's a lot of different influences playing into the leaders in India. So who was behind leading the resistance against Great Britain? The leaders of this were the Indian National Congress. The Indian National Congress. And again, they are the ones leading the resistance against Great Britain. There was another facet to political life in India that created some tension even in the middle of this independence movement. And it was that in 1906, many Muslims created an all-Indian Muslim League. An all-Indian Muslim League. Again, 1906. And this was a political party that was established in the British Indian Empire. It strongly advocated for the establishment of a separate Muslim majority nation state. So they wanted to break away altogether from India into Pakistan, and they successfully did that in 1947. But this is another source of tension in India at the time, in the midst of the struggle for independence. One of the victories early on in 1919 was the Government of India Act. And the Government of India Act allowed more Indian leaders in the government. It basically expanded the role of Indians in their own government. The same year, however, you have the massacre at Punjab, which undermine British claims. And again, this is what pushed people over the edge, and the rally cry for independence became even stronger. So Gandhi's innovations and courage. The leader of this movement, if you had to sort of put a face to the movement, was hands down a guy named Mahatma Gandhi. And again, he was the leader of this movement. He was the leader of the Indian National Congress, and of the independence movement in general. And really, his tactic was that he transformed Congress into a political party with the goal of achieving independence from the British. And one of the ways that he did that, of course, he was known for being, or for encouraging passive resistance, nonviolent resistance to authority, but he also emphasized peasant roots and spiritual traditions. And he encouraged Indians to find their strength in their village roots. Okay, so one thing that people don't always know about Gandhi is that he lived and worked in South Africa for a while, and he developed the concept of satyagraha and this means truth force. Truth force. And this is the term he gave to describe his non-violent civil disobedience. So Gandhi was in South Africa working for a year as a lawyer for an Indian Muslim, but he ended up staying about 21 years to fight for the civil rights of Indians in South Africa. Indians were not treated very well in South Africa. This was also a place under British influence. The Indian community there lived under severe restrictions in Africa. Most of them had come over as indentured servants. They paid heavy taxes. They could be evicted from public places with the threat of beatings or death. There was even a law that stated that all marriages that weren't performed by Christian clergy were illegal. And because of that, it rendered thousands of children illegitimate because the marriage of their parents wasn't seen as legal because they were either performed by a Hindu or Muslim leader. So Gandhi really began to practice this idea of passive resistance, truth force, satyagraha. And these ideals, included self-sacrifice, nonviolent protest, demanding the persecutors to recognize their immorality. And again, these tactics were labeled as passive resistance. So after living in South Africa for over 20 years, Gandhi finally returned to India to lead the Indian National Congress. And before Gandhi got there, the independence movement was pretty much a grassroots effort. It wasn't huge before he got there. Gandhi brought some excellent organizing skills, and he turned the Congress from an organization of Western elites into a massive organization where the members paid dues and they came from the cities and the villages. He created personal networks across India. If there were any failures of Gandhi, it was that, and this is what people criticized him of, but his failures were that socialists perceived him as too pro-business. They feared that he was more on the side of businessmen than he was on the side of the working class. And then the Muslims were concerned that Gandhi would leave them out. If the Indians did achieve independence, what then would happen to the Muslims? And Gandhi wasn't anti-Muslim at all, but people feared that he was. Actually, Gandhi sought a secular state with religious freedom, even though he was Hindu. But the Muslim concerns continued, and in fact, Gandhi was later assassinated by a Hindu who thought he was pro-Muslim. So I feel like his stance was clear on that. He wanted religious freedom for everyone to be able to practice whatever religion they wanted, but Hindus feared he was pro-Muslim, Muslims feared he was anti-Muslim. Nevertheless, Gandhi pursued a secular state with religious freedom. One of the things that Gandhi did, and probably another thing that he is well known for, is the abolition of untouchability. Remember the untouchables in the caste system, the people at the very bottom. They're the ones who scoop sewage out of the street and things like that. Gandhi called those people, the Dalits, the children of God. Now, it's important to note that Gandhi wasn't completely opposed to the caste system, but he was perplexed by how people could enjoy the humiliation of others. And he had various plans to eliminate the barriers against the untouchables. Even though he was a lawyer, he rejected like Western lawyer suits or even Indian lawyer suits. He wore loincloths, shawls, and sandals. That was pretty much his outfit of choice. But all of that was just a protest against untouchability. Gandhi was for prohibition. He saw alcohol as a problem that should be eliminated. He did believe in appropriate technology. He didn't favor like the massive, large factory. Gandhi favored like the personal spinning wheel over the large factory. In fact, the Congress Party made the spinning wheel its symbol, and they had a daily production quota that had to be met in order to be a member. They valued handmade cloth over manufactured cloth. And this actually caused a split in Congress with Nehru, who favored large-scale industry. Nehru was also a politician and an advocate of independence, but he favored large-scale industry over handmade cloths. So Congress campaigns for independence. So from like the 1920s to the 1940s, there were 3 congressional campaigns for independence. And these did fall short of winning independence, but they did make a statement to the world. And these were satyagraha campaigns, like Gandhi had put forth the Truth Force. These were nonviolent, passive resistance campaigns. And the first one was that they boycotted British-dominated schools. And this one lasted from 1920 to 1922. So this was just a boycott of British schools or universities. They boycotted British courts, British admin positions, British imports, just a general boycott. The second was the Salt March campaign, and this one lasted from 1930 to 1932. Again, the Salt March campaign. And the purpose of this was to expose the hardships on Indians that were caused by the British regulation of salt. And so they marched 240 miles from the coast and just showed how easy it was to acquire salt. The problem was that people had to buy it from the British, and the British had a monopoly on salt. So even though it was something that was readily available in India, they had to buy expensive British salt instead. And so the Salt March campaign put government officials in an awkward position because if they arrested them, they looked stupid, and if they didn't, they looked weak. And so this was when Time magazine made Gandhi the Man of the Year in 1931. And this was his march. The third congressional campaign for independence was the Quit India campaign in 1942. And this was simply Indians refusing to participate in World War II until independence was granted. So independence finally came in 1947. The British finally granted the Indians their independence. And there were a couple of other things that happened with this. For one, Pakistan was created as a separate state for Muslims by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who did not believe that Gandhi would protect Muslim interests. And this had been a long-standing concern for Muslims. And so Pakistan emerged, and Hindus and Muslims scrambled to relocate. Another thing that happened was Kashmir was disputed under Indian control. This was an ongoing issue between India and Pakistan, and the boundary was pretty much defined according to the wishes of the citizens. So in 1965, the truce line was finally put into place, and it established an effective border of nations. And Kashmir is located to the north of India and to the east of Pakistan. Another nation that was created was Bangladesh, and this was created by the breakup of East and West Pakistan in 1971. There was actually a Pakistan in East and West India, and so the one in the East became Bangladesh instead.